In a powerful address to the United Nations, Israel's prime minister defended his country's recent military operations, explained their purpose, and urged the world to stand united against terrorism and extremism. Here's a detailed breakdown of what was said. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today's top story focuses on the key moments from Israel's prime minister's address to the United Nations. The speech came at a critical time, with tensions high across the Middle East. The prime minister began by reminding the assembly that Israel has faced decades of security threats, wars, and terrorist attacks, yet has continued to build a thriving democracy and a strong society. He stated that the nation's priority is simple: to ensure its people can live without fear, raise their children safely, and secure a future free from constant conflict. The speech highlighted that the government's duty, like that of any sovereign state, is to protect its citizens at all costs. This opening set the tone for the entire address. Firm, direct, but also forward-looking. It was a message of strength and resilience, but also a call for cooperation and understanding from the international community. The prime minister made it clear that Israel does not seek war, but will never allow its security to be compromised. This was not just a political statement. It was a declaration that Israel's survival and the safety of its people remain the highest priority. The speech moved into a detailed explanation of Israel's recent military operations. According to the prime minister, these were defensive measures designed to stop rocket attacks and cross-border threats. He emphasized that the Israel Defense Forces carefully plan and execute strikes based on intelligence, with the aim of neutralizing militant infrastructure while avoiding civilian casualties as much as possible. The address stressed that Israel uses advance warnings, phone calls, text messages, and even air-dropped leaflets to evacuate civilians before operations take place. Such practices, he noted, are rare in modern warfare, but are part of Israel's commitment to international law and humanitarian standards. He argued that the responsibility for civilian harm ultimately lies with militant groups that embed weapons and fighters within civilian neighborhoods. The prime minister said no country represented in the UN would remain passive if its people were under similar threat, and Israel cannot be an exception. The message was clear: military operations are not retaliation, but a necessity to restore calm and protect lives. The address also placed Israel's security situation in a wider regional context. The prime minister pointed out that many of the attacks on Israel are supported and funded by regional powers, particularly Iran, which backs militant groups operating in Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, and beyond. He warned that these networks not only threaten Israel, but also undermine stability across the Middle East. The prime minister urged the global community to recognize that combating terrorism is not just Israel's battle. It is a shared responsibility for all nations that value peace. He called for collective action to cut off funding for armed groups, stop the flow of weapons, and counter the spread of extremist ideologies. According to him, failing to act now would allow these threats to spread and eventually endanger other countries around the world. The speech framed Israel's actions as part of a broader struggle to create a safer and more stable region, calling for cooperation from allies and international institutions. One of the most notable parts of the speech addressed accusations of disproportionate force. The prime minister argued that the purpose of Israel's actions is not revenge but prevention, preventing future attacks and saving lives. He clarified that proportionality under international law does not mean matching attack for attack, but taking the steps needed to remove a threat. Israel, he said, acts to end hostilities as quickly as possible and restore peace. He urged the world to consider how they would respond if their own cities were under constant fire. The message was that peace will not come from inaction or neutrality, but from decisively stopping those who initiate violence. This section aimed to reframe the global narrative, insisting that Israel's actions are lawful, focused, and in line with its right to self-defense. The Prime Minister also raised concerns about the United Nations' treatment of Israel. He noted that Israel has been the subject of more critical resolutions than many of the world's worst offenders combined. This, he said, creates an unfair imbalance that does little to advance peace. He called on the UN to apply its principles consistently, to condemn terrorism as strongly as it condemns Israel's defensive actions, and to encourage dialogue rather than encourage those who reject negotiations. He urged member states to focus on education, development, and reconciliation rather than political theater. According to him, treating Israel fairly at the UN would build trust and make a negotiated settlement more likely. Attention then turned to peace efforts already underway. The Prime Minister highlighted the Abraham Accords as evidence that former adversaries can become partners when dialogue replaces hostility. These agreements, he said, have unlocked economic growth, innovation, and mutual benefits for both Israel and its neighbors. He repeated Israel's readiness for direct negotiations without preconditions, but insisted that any future agreements must guarantee Israel's security. Lessons from the past, particularly the experience after Israel's withdrawal from Gaza, have made it clear that security arrangements must be robust. The Prime Minister expressed optimism that genuine peace is possible if both sides engage sincerely. The issue of Iran's nuclear ambitions was another focal point. The Prime Minister warned that Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons poses a threat not just to Israel, but to global security. He urged world powers to tighten sanctions, strengthen monitoring, and ensure Iran cannot acquire a nuclear weapon. He also highlighted Iran's support for armed proxies across the region, warning that these networks could become even more dangerous if Tehran were to succeed. While stating that Israel prefers diplomatic solutions, he made clear that the country reserves the right to take action if all else fails. Humanitarian concerns were also addressed. The Prime Minister acknowledged the suffering of civilians in conflict zones and said Israel facilitates humanitarian aid deliveries, including food and medicine, even during escalations. He insisted that the main cause of Gaza's hardship is the use of civilian areas for military purposes by armed groups. He repeated that if attacks were to stop, Israeli military operations would end immediately, allowing for recovery and progress. He said Israel does not want to see civilians suffer and hopes for a future where Gaza can prosper peacefully. The speech also touched on Israel's achievements beyond the battlefield. The Prime Minister described how Israel has turned deserts into farmland, pioneered technologies that benefit the entire world, and contributed breakthroughs in medicine and science. He urged the international community to see Israel as a partner in building a better future, not just a nation in conflict. This section highlighted Israel's resilience and innovation as proof that progress and democracy can thrive even under constant threat. In closing, the Prime Minister called on the international community to make a choice between supporting dialogue and coexistence or allowing extremism to shape the region's future. He promised that Israel would continue to defend itself, but also remain open to opportunities for peace. He expressed hope that future generations would inherit a Middle East defined by cooperation rather than war. The speech ended with a message of determination and optimism that peace is difficult, but not impossible if the world works together.